I am distracted at the beginning here. Everybody that's joining us on Zoom, we're glad that you found us from YouTube. And if you can, until we get to question part, if you can be on mute so that we can hear our presenters and those who are being interviewed. So we will get started in hopes that others will join us. My name is Pastor Mike Gregg, and so welcome to this In Focus at Royal Lane Baptist Church. This will be a time of meaningful conversation as we remember and honor the veterans in our lives. We are glad you're joining us any way that you can. And so remember you can use the chat feature if you would like to ask questions or have them stored there. We can check that. Also, I'm going to ask us as we begin, if you have the name of a veteran in your life that you would like to remember and honor, then please put their name in the chat box as well, so that we can have all see who those people are. I want to there'll be time for questions later in this hour, so if you want to kind of hold on to your questions till we ask for them at the end, that would be great. I'd like to start us with prayer, and then Mike Keith, one of our new deacons, will introduce our guest for this evening, and I will turn it over to him. So let's begin with a prayer by Reverend Jill Duffield, who's a Presbyterian, for this Veterans Time Together. What now and what next, God of all? Will we take down our yard signs and seek signs of your kingdom? Will we build one another up and encourage each other in your name, or will we name call and refuse to see your face reflected in our neighbors? On this Veterans Day, we remember those for whom self was secondary to the common good, those who sacrificed and served, believing in the best principles of our country, even when we failed to live up to them. In the wake of the election, in the mire of this pandemic, and the churning of so many worries, we turn to you, O God, asking you to help us fix our eyes and our focus on Jesus. Help us imitate Christ and take the next step in faith wherever it leads. We live in hope, gracious God, because we follow the crucified and resurrected Christ who sacrificed.
I'm on mute now, aren't I? When you're little.
We live in hope, knowing that you never abandon us, O God. We live in hope, clinging to the promise that you redeem us and make us whole. We live in hope, believing that you will gather us and heal us. And we live in hope because we belong to you. May our living in hope make evident to the world that our hope is not in vain. On this day and every day, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Keith, and we're going to be talking today to one of my favorite people. She's my stepmother. Her name is Opal Keith. She lives in Lubbock. Right now, she is sort of staying with her daughter during this COVID time, but she's pretty independent, has her own home. And the reason we're talking to Opal today is she's unique. She is 98 years old. There's not many of us that are that age. The second thing is she's a war veteran of World War II. And I think the third thing that makes her unique is we're talking to a woman. And we don't oftentimes get to visit with women vets. It's always a man vet, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I thought today it'd be really interesting to talk to her and get some perspectives on what being a veteran really means and how it shaped her life. And we're going to talk to her today. Philip and I are going to be asking questions, and Opal will be expounding on them. And we appreciate that. Thank you, Opal, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
I'm delighted to be able to be honored with your church and your family and the things that all for the veterans.
Opal is a member of Second Baptist Church in Lubbock, which is also a CBF church. And she's been a member there for almost 60 years, if not more so. It's a church that's been around for quite a while. Anyway, we really appreciate having her. Opal, according to my calculations, before the war started, you were just turned around 19. What was your background prior to the war? What were you doing? Where were you living?
Well, I was still at home because maybe we should start with a timeline, because the Great Depression of 1929, we were just coming out of that depression, and the women were still working in the home, and we did not have any travel before that time very much, and there was no food for the cattle, and the farms didn't have irrigation, and so all the farmers and the ranchers were having to leave the land and go into work get jobs in the cities or do whatever they could do. So and I had graduated from high school in 1940, and as every other 19-year-old girl was on December the 7th, when we heard that they had bombed Pearl Harbor, I was listening to music on the radio. There was no television back in those days.
So when World War, so that Sunday morning, you were obviously listening to the radio, I guess, and heard the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. Was that a surprise to you, or was America expecting to be in?
Yes, it was a great surprise to me. We had newspapers, of course, but that was the most of our information. So we really didn't know very much about it. And since it was bombed, it didn't mean an awful lot to us. Of course it did, but we didn't realize all the information that was going to happen after that. But so we were waiting for the next day when Franklin Delano Roosevelt came on December the 8th and gave his famous speech they said, "This day will live in infamy." And it was at that time he says, "We have declared war on Japan." And it was then that everything became in focus, because he said, all the young men from 18 to 45 have to go register for the draft, and that we are now in war.
Did he also declare war on Europe at that same time?
Pardon?
Did he also declare war on Europe at the same time? Declare war on Germany?
Well, it was already going on, yes, and then that was 1941, and all the men had 18 to 45 had gone in, and 1 year later, the war, they were on two fronts, Japan and over in Europe. And that's when they were saying all the men from the second draft, which was 45, was up to 65, 45 to 65. And then they said, that's not enough. Then we need these men at the front. And that's when they said, what to do. And I'm sure the Secretary of Defense and all those admirals were shaking their head when they thought they had to have women in the Navy.
Let me ask you a question real quick before we get to that part, and Philip's going to expound on that a little bit more. Prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, was America in a controversy in terms of going to war with Germany, or you were pretty much aware of what was going on in Europe at that time?
I was not aware of that.
Really?
No.
You were 19 and...
I was 19 and I was listening to music. I was working as I had graduated in 1940, and I was working as a bookkeeper for a grocery company in Tulia.
Okay.
And so that I had been working for 1.5 years for them. The main reason is because we had no money and there was no money for college. So I was working to see what I could get together.
Now, where is Tulia, Texas?
Tulia, Texas is south of Amarillo, about 50 or 60 miles.
Real scenic place?
Pardon?
Is it a real scenic place? Pretty place?
No, it's a very flat place.
Philip, I'm going to turn it over to you and let's see what kind of questions you've got.
Okay, hope we can hear me okay. So you had some options and you decided you were going to join the military.
Yes.
Why did you decide to do that over other options?
Well, since I couldn't go to college, and after all the young men had gone away, and and there was nothing else to do in Tulia except for work, and so when the chance came along with the recruiting there was recruiting in the Navy, in the territory, and when the officer came by giving information on how we could join the Navy, I chose the Navy, and I'm always happy that I have done that. And it was in October of 1942, we were recruited, but we were not put on active duty until January of 1943. They had to get ready for us.
Where did they send you to basic training?
Well, the first place we say where we're going was at Hunter College in New York City.
A long way from Tulia.
Interesting.
New York City, Hunter College.
First time to New York?
Yes,
Assume.
yes. And as a matter of fact, I can give you, when we talk about the party and things like that, I can give you more information on that.
Well, tell them about the troop train.
I will in a minute.
But you went by train though, didn't you?
Train.
New York? You went by train to New York?
Yes, they had recruited all of us, and they made the West Texas people, they called us the Blue Bonnet Squadron.
Oh, really?
And we were the only squadron that had a name. And so they wanted this because they were having the Paramount Pictures from Hollywood to come out and film, and for recruiting of other women. So they planned a big party for us. And when it was time for us to go in January, they asked us to come 2 days earlier, and we had parties, and they'd ask all men in the neighborhood to come, so we'd have somebody to dance with, and they had a big band sound, and they had a real program and a party and a dinner, and there were so many came, and they could bring their wives, and they could hear the big band sound all down in the lobby of the Herring Hotel. And they had officers from Washington, D.C., all the big admirals, and came out to welcome us and watch us as we were sworn into the Navy. And in the meantime, we were having the party 2 days early. And then after the big party, they had 2 trains parked out on the tracks right outside. And then they had a big sign on it with the Blue Bonnet Squadron. And of course, Paramount Pictures was filming all this. And they were filming it because there was no television. And the only action anybody ever saw of the Army or Navy, any of those things, was in the films that you saw 15 minutes before the movie.
Newsreel.
Yes. Uh-huh.
For all you young kids out there.
And then they had started a train from the West Coast, and they were picking up squadrons at every big city as they passed through, as Los Angeles and Phoenix and Albuquerque, all those places along the way. They were picking up squadrons of people. And when they got to Amarillo, we had already been assigned to our train and to the sleeping quarters they were giving us. and to the seats, everything we'd been assigned before we ever boarded the train. And so when the train got there, it was the great goodbyes to our families. And it was a wonder, and the Paramount Pictures followed us all the way to New York City. We picked up passengers at every big city from Oklahoma City and St. Louis, Chicago, and all up and down the road till we got to New York City.
Quite a send-off.
When we got to New York, we thought, oh, the big city and all the lights and things. But of course, there were no lights because during that time we had to have blackouts.
Right.
Even the people out on the farm had to put dark curtains up in case a plane came by and they were enemies and they could bomb us.
Golly.
So, and when we got to New York City, they were supposed to have Mayor LaGuardia. What is that?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Anyway, LaGuardia was supposed to be there.
And Mayor LaGuardia was supposed to be there. And we were an hour late, so he met the train from Houston, but we were the only ones that were being filmed. And so of course Paramount was really disappointed that he did not greet us, but our buses were there and to load us in and take us over to Hunter College in the Queens. And I might say that our group was billeted in apartments, and those apartments were furnished from the furniture from the Queen Mary, who had been made into a troop trip, and all the furniture came out of the Queen Mary, except for they couldn't get away from bunk beds. So they had those Navy bunk beds, but all the other furniture was beautiful furniture from Queen Mary.
Bill, you have another question?
Yeah, so where was your ultimate assignment when you were shipped off?
My what?
Final assignment.
It-
What ship were you put on?
Well, from New York, from Hunter College, we stayed there 4 weeks. Then they decided what we were good to do and could do. And they sent us, a group of us went to Milledgeville College for Women in Milledgeville, Georgia. That was a woman's college. And we stayed there learning about secretaries and bookkeepers and all kinds of things, and for 2 or 3 months. And then the final place that we went to was at Bureau of Supplies and Accounts, which had been moved out of the Pentagon in Washington to the Cleveland, Ohio, in case Washington was bombed. Bureau of Supplies and Accounts was once called the bank because they sent out all the checks to all the Navy. And all supplies was sent out from the Bureau of Supplies and Accounts.
So you mentioned Cleveland. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience in Cleveland and what adjustments and friendships you made coming from West Texas?
Uh-oh, Carol.
I think you're on mute, Carol.
Carol?
Maybe Mike can help unmute her.
There you are. We can
Are
hear
we
you now.
back? Are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay. So you were talking about Cleveland.
Okay, Cleveland we could ride the streetcars free, and we could go to the movies at a real discounted price, as well as the plays in the round at the suburbs, and we could go to the horse races, all kinds of things we could do for minimum amount or for free in Cleveland. And we were called upon at all times for anything that had anything to do with marching down the street, and we on Veterans Day, everything, all veterans and all kinds of Army and Navy personnel were in the stadium at the big Cleveland Clinic, or big Cleveland Stadium, and there was hundreds of veterans and Army and Navy personnel.
You made some strong friendships there. Can you expound on that just a little bit? I know about it, but I'd like for you to tell about it.
We made lots of friends. And then also, at one time, when we got to Cleveland, they were very cautious of us to not be with the men. They did not house us anywhere near the men. So we were housed in downtown hotels, and they were giving us a subsistence to eat out. And so my roommate and I ate rather frugally during the week, but we decided to eat at an upscale place on Friday night. And that place it was Stouffer's, and it was the forerunner of the Stouffer frozen food today. But it was a lovely restaurant and very good food. And when we had been there for 2 or 3 times, and so the maitre d' came by and asked us that some folks had asked if we would come to their table for dessert, and which we did. And he said, be sure and tell them I'm the commercial artist for the Stouffer Corporation. And that happened for 2 or 3 weeks, dessert with those folks. And then they made a room for us, and every weekend we would go to their house, which was 320th Street from downtown Cleveland, and it was on Lake Erie. And so we had a place for going to the lake and picnicking and all kinds, and we could bring our friends.
What was your job description? What did you actually do in Cleveland? What did you do? You told me, but I'd like you tell everybody else.
You mean with our friends?
No, what was your job in the Navy?
No, your actual job description.
We got to Cleveland, to the Bureau of Supplies and Accounts, and I was assigned to the Bureau of Supplies and Accounts, captured and missing Navy people. If a ship went down in the middle of the ocean, we got the payroll and we kept it up to date. Every 3 months, we brought it up to date. If a ship went down and there was no one to help capture anyone, we kept it for a year and a day, and then we sent that payroll to the dead file, and they would send $10,000 to their next of kin, as well as their year's pay. But with all captured and missing men, their payroll came to our department.
So were you very optimistic that we would win the war on both fronts?
Carol, she went mute again.
Seemed to think that we were going to.
It kind
Say
of,
that again. Just repeat what you just said. Sorry.
I said all of the Navy personnel, the officers, everybody knew we were going to win the war. There was never any thought about not winning.
And how were you getting your updates and information besides you were getting, it was newspaper and newsreels and that was it, or radio?
We didn't have any other than what we came in. We knew anytime a ship went down, and we knew anytime there had been some captured men. And of course, we were sad about all of that. And we had all the men went on the Bataan March. All their records came to us. And after the war, there were 2 men from the Bataan March came in to collect their pay. They looked like skeletons, but they had a happy smile on their face, and they were glad to be Americans.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. So what was VE Day like? Or I think it's Victory in Europe, I believe. How did you learn about it?
It was like every other place, like New York. We were down in the streets hugging everybody and dancing with people who hadn't even thought about knowing. But it was just a big celebration all over. And of course we were all living in downtown hotels and not all of us were in the same hotel. But my roommate, now I guess there were 12 of us in the hotel that we lived in. But in the last year, they had enough Navy ladies that they could hire their own, they got their own hotel, and we had to live like the boys did with a mess hall, and we couldn't eat out anymore with subsistence. But it was a wonderful time.
Yeah, I bet. All right, Dad, I'll turn it back over to you. You can move on to
You meaning
your
me?
post-war.
Yeah. Did the bombing of Japanese surprise you? Our bombing the Japanese, were you aware that something was going on at the time, or?
Oh yes, we got all the records of those people that when they were bombing and bombing those ships and killing and injuring people. We got all their records. And that's the only way we knew, because we didn't have any other way of knowing anything except through on the radio, and our officers did not give us any information other than what we could see was happening.
What about the bombing of Tokyo and Hiroshima?
Hiroshima, yeah.
Yeah, Hiroshima.
Nagasaki.
Yeah.
Nagasaki.
Were you aware that was fixing to happen, or did that take everybody by surprise, or?
The atomic bomb.
Yes, it did, and it was after then that that Japanese really conceded and gave up. And it was when Truman said, and actually the European war was over before the atomic bomb happened.
Right.
And so,
Right.
and when the European war was over, Churchill said, we will join hands and fight Japan, and we'll help the United States. And that was in May of 45. And by August of 45, the Japanese, after that all was bombed, they did a wonderful job on the USS Missouri with Hirohito and President Truman. And they
How long
all,
after that did you muster out of was it that you mustered out of the Army after the
well, I
war?
didn't muster out until January of 46.
Okay, so you're there another 6 months, 5 months.
I had been in for the duration, but did not muster out until January of 46.
Okay, all right, okay. And then you came back to Lubbock
Yes, I came,
eventually.
I went back to Tulia, but then I came to Lubbock to work.
Okay.
And I started working at that time as a secretary to Bill Meade with Bill Meade's Baking Company.
And the time elapsed there, you had married, and then and Carol was born, and then just a little information, you were divorced when you came back to Lubbock to work for Bill Meade at that time. And I guess the question I have is, your experience with the war and independence, how did that help you in the challenges at that time period? Because in 1955, divorced women were working. There was an enigma there. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yes, it helped a great deal, because all that bookkeeping that we were doing, as I had been doing bookkeeping before the war, and all the bookkeeping that they kept on all the records and things helped. And after I started working for as a secretary to Bill Meade, and then as when he moved in all of his baking mains to Dallas, I started working for the fur is a buyer for all the health and beauty aids and all the over-the-counter medical things for 142 stores for the grocery company.
Okay, you're working in a man's world then, weren't you, in a sense? And you told me a story, which I love, about getting a loan for a house. Would you tell that story?
Yes, about a year later, I made application for a loan for a house. And I went to the local Veterans Administration, or the local board that was issuing those kind of loans. I had perfect credit, and I had a job. And so they looked at all my records, and I was the first woman that they had ever asked for anything like that for a house. But then when I went back to see what had happened, they said, "You're a woman and you have a child, and we don't think that you will be able to last for 20 years making payments for a house. And so we have declined the loan." And I never did get it. In today's world, they wouldn't dare say you're a woman and you have a child. But I did not get a veteran's loan. But I did get from someone else.
We had another question come in. Were you eligible for the GI Bill to go to college?
That's what yes, I was eligible for GI Bill in college, but I came to Lubbock and started to work, and I just continued working because I needed the money for my child. So I did not go to college after that, but there was another program that you could work and learn other things, and that's what I did.
So working in the man's world as a buyer for furs, did you run into a glass ceiling type situation where, oh, you're a woman? Did you have any confrontation like that?
Yes, I had lots of things. For instance, I applied for a job as an assistant in a drug, in a pharmacy is what it was. It's a pharmacy. But they said because I was a woman and probably had lots of problems and I was raising a child, that they were afraid I'd get on drugs. And so they didn't hire me. But everybody said exactly what they thought back in those days, and you couldn't sue them.
Oh, glad we live today. We're going to sort of change it up just a little bit right now, and we're going to get back to Opal in just a second. But we're going to go to talk about my dad, Opal's husband, and talk about his experience in World War II, because he was also a vet. My dad, in 1943, he was 17, just turned 17, and he really wanted to go. And his parents finally signed him over and let him go at 17. He did turn 18 a month later, but he went into the war and he was going to be in the Air Force. But there were so many flyboys, they said, "No, we need you in Europe right now. We're running out of people." So he went to basic training in Mississippi, and then, he was on a ship and on the way over to Europe. And they put him in intelligence, which he always laughed about. He said, "Why they put me in intelligence, I'll never know." And he said, "All I did was plant mines and take prisoners to camps, or escort prisoners." He said, "That didn't sound very intelligent to me." By 44, he was toward the end of 44, he was running they were on a mission in France. They were protecting this home in France, or this town, but they needed to move to another section. So they needed somebody to volunteer to run a mine detector to check on mines as they went down this path. And they were sort of ahead of the troops, he and his sergeant. And he didn't volunteer. He was volunteered. he said, naturally, it was me. And it was a night where the moon was full, but there were a lot of clouds. So it'd be light and then it'd be dark, and then it'd be light and then it'd be dark. And he noticed that the trees would change shapes, and he couldn't figure out what it was. Well, it was Germans hiding behind the trees. And all of a sudden they let out with bazookas and everything else, and they hit his legs. The bullets would hit off the hard surfaces and go up into his legs, that sort of thing. Anyway, he was captured, and I'll make this very short, ended up at a prisoner of war camp. After the Germans, which they didn't have to do, they operated on him. Now, they didn't have any anesthetic. I love this story. My sister's here. She knows about it. They didn't have any anesthetic to do his surgery on his legs to save his life. So, because they used all the anesthetic on the Germans. So they gave him a bottle of cognac. And he always laughed and said, I'd never had a drop of liquor in my life. And he said, I drank that bottle of cognac, and he said, I was as sober before as after. I was so scared. Didn't do a thing for him. And so all of a sudden the lights went out. And what they did, the guy behind him, who I guess you would call the anesthesiologist, had a blackjack and kept hitting him on the head, knocking him out during surgery. Mm-hmm. And just popping, he said, I woke up, my head hurt a lot worse than my legs did. But they saved his life, ended up in a prisoner of war camp. Opal, you tell one. I'm going to let you tell a story because you told it to me yesterday. What happened when he got to the prisoner of war camp?
Well, he got there and there was no crutches, and he had limbs from a tree that he used for crutches. And there was so much lice in the camp that they had to burn those mattresses. And they had also Russian prisoners as well as American prisoners. And as soon as he got there, he saw a group of men all on their knees down in the little circle, down in the corner of the room. He said, well, I guess they play dice all over the place, everywhere. And so someone said, that's not dice, that is a prayer. And we have a constant prayer going, and they're praying that we get out of here by Easter, and which was 3 months away. And Bill said, why Easter? How about tomorrow? Anyway, and the bottom of the story is that Easter, the troops from America came and knocked down, and as the big tanks came through, knocked down the gates, and they were captured on Easter. Prayers, another miracle.
Yeah. It was a remarkable thing. He had survived the prisoner of war camp with the wounds. They didn't have anything to take care of the wounds except to sit him out in the sun and let the sun sort of work on healing. That was his only form of healing whatsoever. Opal, as Opal said, when the tanks came through, they had set him in a situation where he could see the front gate. They knew that the Germans were gone. All the Germans had left by this time, and they were actually guarding themselves, not wanting anybody to get out for fear that friendly fire would kill him. So everybody stayed in the camp. And they knew the war was coming to an end because the sky would be black in the morning with our planes flying toward the east, and then black at night as they were flying back to the west, where they had dropped their bombs on Germany and were coming back. So he knew things were happening. In fact, some of them would fly low, and they knew it was a prisoner of war camp, and would do their wings like this, which was very interesting to say, "We got you, buddy. We'll be there in just a minute." Of course, it was an experience. So, Opal, I have an answer to this. I could answer this, but I want you to. How do you, knowing Dad's POW experiences, how do you think that shaped him in terms of meeting the challenges of life and doing what he was successful at all of his life?
Well, your dad was born with a wonderful personality, and that in turn made him a great salesman. And of course, he helped with that, made him a leader. And that's why they said when it came time to go out on that track, changing, when he got all those shrapnel in his legs, they said, okay, Bill Keith, you can come with this officer and we'll go out there, because the officer trusted Bill Keith, and Bill Keith was an honest person, and if you have a great personality, that makes you a great salesman. And Bill Keith, he says it changed him when he went to the prison, because it said he promised God if they got him out of there, he would always, whatever profession he was in, he would always serve God, and he did.
He did. That is absolutely.
I just want to mention, if I can just interrupt, just for everyone else to know, as a young child, we would interview Granddad about these experiences, and he was not the type of vet that shied away from his stories. You hear about the silent generation, but that was not my experience with Bill. He was really honest about what happened, and I don't know how he was just able to not internalize it. I guess maybe talking about it over 30 years helped him just be able to tell the story. So it's really interesting.
He had night sweats, and right after the war, and Mom and Dad had gotten married back in the late 40s, he would wake up in a very cold sweat. And I think that ended maybe 10 years into the marriage, something like that. But I've got to add this, Opal. When after my mom died, and Opal knew my mom very well, and but after he died, it just so happened they got to. He was in Lubbock, and Opal wanted to give her condolences and came by my aunt's to see Dad, and we'll just leave it. One thing led to another, and Opal had been single all this time and had been very independent, and for 40 years. And I mean, she said, Bill Keith, I like you. I like going out with you, but I'm not going to marry you. But he was a very persistent person. He never took the word no for granted at all. And he asked her over and over again until she said, yes, I'll marry you. And he did the same thing to my mother. My mother didn't want to marry him either. And he just, so this is a very persistent, I can do it. Don't tell me I can't, because I can. And I think a lot of that stems from his World War II experience. Now, Opal, we talked about my dad. How did your experience in the war shape you in a sense?
How did it shape me?
Yeah, how did it make you more independent? Did it give you drive?
Well, yes, it helps me but after I was married and had one child, I knew that at that time that I couldn't live with this man and be honest to my child. So I was divorced, and I was divorced for 45 years, and I worked for the company and made a living and supported her through those years until she was in college. So I was independent enough. I guess it just made me more so.
There you go. Got to ask you this one last question. As a veteran, not only of World War II, but also of the Great Depression, and also a member of what Tom Brokaw always called the greatest generation, what would you say to young people today?
What do I think of the young people
No,
today?
what would you say?
What would you say to them? based upon your experience?
Well, I would say that I feel that they feel they are more entitled than we ever thought we were. And it may have been our fault because when we came back from the war, we wanted our children to have everything that we didn't. And I think it had been passed on. But today's children do not want to work for, or it seems to me, they don't want to work for as much, and they feel that they're entitled to too many things.
Okay, Mike, there were questions, and can you relay some of those questions?
Okay.
I think we tried to answer them all. Phil grabbed some of them, but I don't know if there are any more.
Asked, the GI bill.
So we can open it up, and if you have a question for Opal, you can put your question in chat, or I would even say if you wanted to unmute yourself and do that, I would love to take questions that way too.
How did God play a part in your life in
Are you asking me to ask a question?
no,
We're waiting to see if anybody has questions for you that's in this
Okay.
Zoom.
I was
Did
asking the question of how did God play a part in her life during the Navy?
Did you hear that, Opal?
Yes. Do you want to know about what I thought about God in the Navy?
Mm-hmm.
Well, number one, I thought I should go to church. And of course, there was no Southern Baptist there, but there was an American Baptist, which I did go to. That it was a storefront into an old movie house. And the marquee said, "I'll be seeing you." And I thought, oh, this must be really a church that maybe I shouldn't be going to. Maybe it's not the right kind of church. Because that was the song of the sea. That was on the number one on the hit parade. But of course, but it was close by, so I went over to that and went in. And of course, the minister made it seem like even though some people died, you can see them in the sunset. You can see them in the clouds, and it was a wonderful sermon, and it helped me to understand what "I'll be seeing you" really means.
Beautiful answer.
And from that time on, I went to that church, the Euclid Avenue Baptist Church
Oh
in
wow,
Cleveland.
that's a good story.
But it made her nervous that it was a church that was using the format of the day, and my goodness, should a little girl from Tulia, Texas, be going to a church like that?
Yeah.
That was my first experience with a little bit of liberalism.
Yes. So we had a question. Did the Bluebonnets wear uniforms?
Oh yeah.
Oh, they wore yes, they had that's one of the reasons that we couldn't go for 3 months. They had to get all of our uniforms. We got to the Hunter College that night, but the next morning came and life was never the same, because that was the first day of issuing all uniforms, shoes, hats, everything. And we were never to be without them. We could not wear civilian clothes the rest of the duration.
I don't know if you can see this. I don't think it'll show up here. This is Opal in her.
Oh yeah, that you can see it.
Sort
Oh,
of.
yes.
I
I
think the
see.
light's reflecting on it, but that's her in her uniform.
Yes, we had to have your uniform if we ever left the room. We had to have uniforms on.
Another question.
Had a question.
Yeah, another question is, were there shortages of certain items like toilet paper and things like that?
Yes, and we did get ration tickets for sugar and butter and flour, and also there was shortages for tobacco, and we would trade our tobacco tickets with somebody else for sugar and butter and the things that were on, like tires and all those kind of things. But there were lots of rationing going on, but we got a portion, we got some rationing tickets, and the ones that we got in Cleveland, we gave to the people that we spent the weekends with, like for sugar and butter and flour, things like that, the household things.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're drawing to a close. Anybody have any last questions for Opal?
Hi, Opal. It's Becky.
Hi,
I
Becky.
love you.
It's nice to see you.
You too.
Well, we have gotten a lot of comments that say this has been wonderful. Thanks for sharing your memories and your stories. So we really, really appreciate hearing from you today, and for you joining us as we've shared these stories together.
Well, thanks for honoring me today. I've enjoyed it. I know about your church. Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you.
And we'll be
Well,
seeing you.
And
Oh.
I'll be seeing you in the clouds. And all over.
I guess she's not coming to Dallas.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. I hope you have a good evening. And again, we pray for and honor our vets on this day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.